You've been told that patience means waiting quietly, sitting still, not complaining while life does what life does. You've been taught that it is the soft virtue, the gentle, yielding kind, the one that whispers, "Hold on, God is working." And you believed it, because it sounds right. It sounds biblical. It sounds like the kind of thing that should be stitched on a pillow somewhere. But that is not what the Greek says. The Greek word your New Testament translates as patience, the one that appears 32 times in your English Bible, is hypomoné, and it has nothing to do with sitting quietly. The word is built from two parts: hupo, under, meno, to remain, to stay, to abide. The same verb meno that the Gospel of John uses when Jesus says, "Abide in me, dwell in me, remain in me, stay." And when you put hupo and meno together, you get hypomoné, to remain under, not to step aside, not to put down the weight and rest on the sidelines, to stay underneath something heavy and refuse to move. This is not softness. This is the vocabulary of soldiers and weightlifters and men who refuse to retreat. The Roman army had a tactic called testudo, the tortoise formation. Soldiers locked their shields above their heads and to their sides, pressed together, and advanced under a rain of arrows and stones. No single soldier could protect himself alone. What protected them was staying under the shared weight of the shields, moving forward together, not breaking the formation no matter what came down on top of them. Ancient readers of the New Testament would have recognized the posture in hypomoné immediately. You stay in formation. You don't break. You move. Picture yourself standing at the edge of an ancient Greek gymnasium. A man approaches a stone block, rough cut, enormous, probably 200 pounds of unforgiving weight. He doesn't grab it and toss it away from himself. He bends his knees, locks his spine, ducks his shoulders underneath, and holds. Every muscle in his body is engaged, jaw set, eyes fixed on the wall in front of him. And then he simply stands there, refusing to let the weight drive him into the ground. That act, staying under a load you could choose to release, choosing not to, is the physical image living inside the word hypomoné. There is a reason Chrysostom, the 4th century Greek-speaking preacher who is one of the most important voices in early Christian theology, called hypomoné the queen of the virtues. Not a virtue, the queen, the one that enables all the others. Because the others can be performed in comfortable conditions. Generosity when you have enough. Joy when things are going well. Gentleness when no one is pushing you. But hypomoné only exists under pressure. The weight is not incidental to the virtue. The weight is what produces it. Now watch the word work inside the actual text. The Apostle Paul uses it in Romans 5, verses 3 and 4. And you probably know the passage, but you may not have heard it the way he wrote it. He says, "We also rejoice in our sufferings, our thlipsis, our pressures, our crushing circumstances." The word itself means to be pressed, to be squeezed from all sides, because we know that suffering produces hypomoné, not patience in the sense of growing calmer. Hypomoné, the capacity to remain under. And then, Paul says, hypomoné produces dokime, proven character, the word used for metal that has been tested in fire and proved genuine. And dokime produces hope. There is a chain here. It starts with a load. It ends with something unshakable. Let that settle for a moment. Suffering is not an obstacle to hypomoné. Suffering is the material that hypomoné is made of. There are two other passages worth stopping at before we reach the most famous ones. Luke 21:19. Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he has just told them that they will be betrayed by family members, handed over to authorities, hated because of his name. And then he says, "By your hypomoné, you will gain your lives. Not by your escape, not by your resolution, not by your successful navigation of the situation. By your remaining under, you will gain your lives." The word is almost shockingly brief in the Greek. Hypomoné is the entire mechanism described in that sentence. It is not the reward, it is the instrument. And then Romans 8:25, Paul is writing about the whole creation groaning, waiting for redemption. And he comes to what hope means in a world that has not yet arrived at its promised end. He says, "If we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with hypomoné." Notice, the hoping and the hypomoné are not separate activities. The hoping is what powers the remaining under. If you could see the destination, you wouldn't need hypomoné, you'd just walk toward it. Hypomoné is precisely the virtue you need when the destination is real but not yet visible. You stay under the weight because you know what is on the other side of it, even though you can't see it from where you're standing. The lexicon BDAG, the Bauer, Danker, Arndt, Gingrich Greek lexicon. the gold standard reference used in seminary Greek courses worldwide, defines hypomoné as the capacity to hold out or bear up in the face of difficulty, not wait and see, not sit calmly, hold out, bear up. There is physical stubbornness in those phrases. They belong to the language of men who are pressed but won't yield, not men who have gone quiet and folded themselves into gentle acceptance. It is worth spending a moment on why the translators chose patience in the first place, because it is not a bad translation, it is just an incomplete one. The Latin Vulgate, which was the dominant Bible in Western Christianity for over 1,000 years, used the word patientia, endurance, suffering, forbearance. When the English translators came along in the 16th century, they reached for the closest English equivalent, patience. And in the English of that era, patience carried more weight than it does today. It was closer to the Latin one the wa. It implied bearing hardship, not just waiting. But the word has softened over 400 years of use. Today, patience sounds like calmly waiting in a long line. It sounds like holding your tongue when you want to say something sharp. It sounds like the virtue you need at the DMV. That is not what hupemeinen means, but that is what 4 centuries of a softer English has done to the translation. You are reading a word that has drifted from its dock. And this is exactly why the scholar William Barclay, in his commentary on the New Testament, stopped to correct the English translation. He wrote that hypomoné is not the patience which sits down and accepts things, but the patience which masters them. Not passive endurance, mastering. That one word changes everything about how you read the New Testament. It is the difference between a person who has given up inside but carries on because what choice is there, and a person who is still moving, still resisting, still holding the weight with deliberate intent and a clear reason for doing so. Now here's the passage that most people think of when they think of endurance in the New Testament. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 1 and 2. The writer has just spent all of chapter 11 walking through the hall of faith. Abraham, who left without knowing where he was going. Moses, who chose hardship with the people of God over the pleasures of Egypt. The prophets, who were tortured and did not accept release so that they might gain a better resurrection. All of these, he says, are a cloud of witnesses surrounding you as you run. And then he pivots. He says, let us run with hypomoné, the race that is set before us. Let us run with the capacity to stay under the load, not sprint and collapse, stay under it and keep moving. And then he says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him, hupemeinen ton stauron, endured the cross, remained under the cross, despising its shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. I want you to hear what the writer of Hebrews is doing here because it is not subtle. He is not calling you to feel peaceful about your hardship. He is calling you to look at a specific act, the act of the Son of God bending under the weight of the worst instrument of death in the Roman world with the capacity to stop it at any moment and choosing not to. Jesus did not wait quietly on the cross. He endured it. He stayed under it. Hupemeinen. And the reason the writer gives is not that Jesus had no feeling, no dread, no anguish. The Gethsemane passage makes clear that he did. The reason is the joy set before him. Something beyond the load was worth staying under it for. Consider him, the writer says in verse 3. Consider, katanoeo in Greek, to think hard, to observe closely, to analyze. Consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. The Greek for lose heart is ekluo, to be unstrung, like a bowstring that has gone slack. You were designed for tension. The tension is not the problem. Losing the tension, that is the problem. The writer of Hebrews is doing something very specific with the athletic metaphor in chapter 12. He has just described a cloud of witnesses, but this is not a crowd of spectators cheering in the stands. The witnesses of chapter 11 are the people who ran the same race before you. Abraham ran it, Moses ran it, the prophets ran it. They are not watching from outside. They are the evidence that the race is survivable. Their presence in the text is meant to answer the question that every person carrying a heavy load eventually asks. Has anyone else carried this and come through it? The answer Hebrews gives is, look at the list. Look at the names. Look at what they were asked to carry and look at the fact that they are still counted as faithful. You are not the first person to be in the middle of something that looks unfinishable, and you will not be the last. But then the writer does something even more specific. He says, lay aside every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles, and run. The word for encumbrance is okon, the word for weight, bulk, anything that slows movement. He is not asking you to pretend the load is not heavy. He is asking you to distinguish between the weight you were given to carry and the weight you picked up along the way, because there is a difference. The hypomoné required of you is to stay under the assigned weight, not to collect additional burdens and then wonder why the race is impossible. Not every weight on your back is the one God put there. Some of them you put there yourself. Lay those down. The one you were given, that one you stay under. And then fixing your eyes on Jesus. Not fixing your feelings, not fixing your circumstances, your eyes. The direction of your attention. The writer knows that what you look at determines whether you keep moving or you stop. Peter walked on water when he looked at Jesus and sank when he looked at the waves. The instruction is not feel confident. It is look at the right thing. Look at the one who already went through what you are going through and came out the other side of it glorified. And then run. Now here's the honest turn. This is the part that many word study videos will skip because the simple version is more emotionally satisfying. And I am not going to do that to you because this channel owes you the scholarship even when it complicates the picture. Some teachers will tell you that hypomoné is always triumphant, always forward-moving, almost aggressive in its posture, active endurance. And there is real truth in that. The BDAG and Thayer's lexicon are both clear that this is not passive resignation. But here is what those same lexicons also acknowledge. The New Testament uses hypomoné in contexts that include genuine anguish, genuine doubt, and genuine heaviness. James 1:3 says that the testing of your faith produces hypomoné. But the testing James has in mind is not a mild inconvenience. He is writing to Jewish Christians who have been scattered because of persecution, people who lost homes, livelihood, communities. And then in James 5:11, he gives us the paradigm case of hypomoné in the Old Testament. He says, "You have heard of the perseverance, hypomoné, of Job, the patience of Job. Job, the man who spent 37 chapters arguing with God, who said, 'I cry to you, and you do not answer,' who said, 'Has not my life always been weary to me?' Who said, 'God has delivered me to the ungodly.' The patience of Job is not quiet acceptance. It is a man who is furious, grieving, confused, deeply offended, and still there, still talking to God, still in the story. That is hypomoné. You can lament loudly and still have it. You can question and still have it. The commitment is not to your emotional temperature. The commitment is to your position. You do not walk away from the load. That is not a small distinction, because many people who are carrying real weight have been told, implicitly or explicitly, that their anguish is a form of impatience. That if they were really trusting God, they would feel peaceful. The Greek word does not authorize that accusation. Job is the model, and Job was not peaceful. He was faithful in the sense that he didn't walk away, and that is the only faithfulness the word is asking for. Now I want to bring in the second Greek word that your Bible also translates as patience, because knowing the difference between the two unlocks a layer of the New Testament that most English readers never see. The other word is makrothumia. It comes from makros, long, and thumos, passion, spirit, the fire inside a person. Makrothumia, long-tempered, slow to ignite. And it refers specifically to patience with people, the slow-burning endurance that refuses to retaliate, to write someone off, to respond to being wronged by becoming someone who wrongs. It is one of the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians 5:22, in the same list as love and joy and peace. It is God's own disposition toward human beings, Peter says in his second letter, that the Lord is being makrothumos, long-tempered toward you, not wanting any to perish. Every day that God does not judge is a day of makrothumia. Hypomoné and makrothumia are not the same word, and they are not interchangeable, and yet English almost always flattens them into the same translation. Archbishop Trench, the 19th century New Testament lexicographer, drew the line with precision. Makrothumia is patience with persons. Hypomoné is endurance of circumstances and things. One is about who you are dealing with. The other is about what you are carrying. When Paul prays for the Colossians in chapter 1, verse 11, he prays that they would be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for all hypomoné and makrothumia. For both, the endurance of things and the endurance of people. He is not being redundant. He knows that real life attacks on both fronts simultaneously. You need to stay under the circumstances, and you need to stay generous toward the people, often the same people who are contributing to the circumstances. Paul wants both active at the same time, because real suffering almost always involves both dimensions at once. And then there is one more place where hypomoné appears, and where the word's full weight needs to be felt. Revelation 13:10. The context is the vision of the beast, the imperial power, Rome at its most frightening, and the writer is addressing communities of believers who are being pressed toward worship of the state, who face real consequences for refusing. The verse says, "If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed." Here is the hypomoné and the faith of the saints. Not, here is their calm. Not, here is their beautiful acceptance. Here is their hypomoné, their remaining under. their refusal to abandon their position while the empire does its worst. The word stands at the end of a sentence about imprisonment and execution, like a soldier who refuses to leave his post. That is what you translate as patience. Now here is the famous passage, the one that most people have heard preached, and the one that comes alive in a completely different way when you hear it through the Greek. James 1:2-4. My brothers, consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces hypomoné. And let hypomoné have its perfect work, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. You have probably heard that passage preached as encouragement to stay positive. Count your blessings, find the silver lining. But that is not what it says. Look at the sequence. The trial is not the enemy. The trial is the teacher. The testing produces hypomoné, not tolerance of the trial, but a forged capacity to stay under it, a muscle built by the very experience of being pressed. And then James says, let hypomoné have its perfect work. The Greek word for perfect here is teleion, complete, whole, having arrived at its intended end. The implication is that hypomoné has work to do in you, and that work has a completion point. And if you put down the weight before it finishes, you will be incomplete in a way that matters. What James is describing is the logic of training. You do not build the capacity to carry heavy loads by avoiding heavy loads. You do not develop hypomoné by being kept from the things that require it. The trials are the curriculum. The staying is the course. And the outcome, mature, complete, lacking nothing, only comes to the people who let the process run. And if the testing seems long, if you have been in it long enough that you have lost track of what it felt like before, then consider that James does not give hypomoné an expiration date. He says let it have its perfect work, not endure until you feel better, not endure until circumstances improve. Let the work complete. There is a difference between a process that is failing and a process that is not yet finished. The Greek does not let you confuse those two things. Now here is where this stops being a word study and becomes something you have to answer. Think about the thing in your life that is heavy right now. Not the inconvenience, not the difficulty that is annoying but manageable. The thing. The diagnosis you are still waiting on, or the one you already have and are learning to live inside. The relationship that has been strained so long that the strained version is starting to feel like the normal version. The calling that cost more than you calculated when you said yes. The prayer you have prayed so many times you have stopped counting the days and started counting the years. The grief that is supposed to be in the rearview mirror by now but somehow keeps finding you in the quiet. What have you been told to do with that? Wait quietly? Trust the process? Put on a composed face so that the people around you can see you modeling faith correctly? What if the text is asking something harder and also something more honest? What if it is asking you to stay under it, not to look peaceful while carrying it, but to actually stay, to refuse to put down the assignment and walk away, even when the assignment has become brutal? What if the proof of your faith is not your serenity, but your position? Here's what I think we have been trained to miss. When you hear the word patience, you probably think of a posture, a feeling, a spiritual state you are supposed to maintain, a kind of interior quietness even while the external circumstances are difficult. And so you measure yourself by that. Am I feeling patient? Am I feeling at peace about this? And when the answer is no, when you are frustrated, when you are exhausted, when you are angry about the same thing for the 50th time, you conclude that you don't have enough patience and need to work on it. But hypomoné is not measured by your interior temperature. It is measured by your position. Are you still there? That is the question. Not are you still serene? Not are you still managing your emotions well? Are you still there? Are you still in the relationship you could have left? Are you still in the city you were sent to when everything in you is asking why? Are you still doing the work that hasn't paid off yet? Still showing up to the thing that hasn't yielded what you were told it would yield? Because the people Jesus describes in Luke 21, the ones who will gain their lives by their hypomoné, are not people who feel calm about being betrayed by family members and handed over to authorities. They are people who, in the middle of exactly that, do not break formation. They stay in the story. They don't walk away from the God who put them in the position that is costing them everything. That is what the word is asking for, and it is harder than serenity. Serenity is something that happens to you under the right conditions. Hypomoné is something you choose when the conditions are wrong. There is one more thing the word hypomoné will not let you do, and it is worth naming directly. It will not let you confuse strategic rest with quitting. Taking a breath is not breaking formation. Stepping back to recover is not walking away. The men in the testudo formation did not hold their shields without pause for days. They moved, they rested in position, they kept the formation even at camp. Hypomoné is not the demand that you feel no weight. It is the refusal to put down the assignment permanently. Rest under the load. Grieve under the load. Be angry under the load. All of that is permitted. What the word does not permit is the permanent departure, the decision that the assignment is over when God has not yet said it is over. That distinction matters because many people who believe they have failed at patience have actually just rested. They took a season, they stepped back, they stopped performing strength for a while and let themselves be honestly tired. That is not a failure of hypomoné, that is hypomoné protecting itself. The failure would be if they never came back, if they decided the wait was proof that the assignment was wrong, if they used the difficulty as the final evidence that they were released from the responsibility. The question is not whether it is heavy. Of course it is heavy. The question is, are you still in it? Job did not stay quiet. He is famous for not staying quiet. He argued his case before God with the kind of directness that makes religious people uncomfortable. He said, "Let me speak and you reply to me." He demanded an audience. He accused. And when the dialogue finally comes to its end and God has answered from the whirlwind and Job has covered his mouth and gone still, God turns to the three friends who spent 30-some chapters managing Job's theology into something more acceptable. And he says, "You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." The men who maintained their composure, who offered the tidy theodicy, who kept their language about God safe, they failed the test. The man who screamed from the ash heap passed it, not because he was right about everything, because he stayed. That is hypomoné. That is the patience of Job. It is not quietness, it is staying. I think about what it means that the writer of Hebrews finishes that sentence about Jesus with, "so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." He knows we're tired. He is not pretending the load is light. He is not commanding you to feel differently than you feel. He is giving you a reason to keep looking in the right direction, toward the one who endured the worst load in history and came out the other side of it seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Look at him, the writer says, and then stay. If hypomoné lives in your life, it doesn't look like someone who never struggles. It looks like someone who is still there, still in the hospital, still in the hard conversation, still showing up for the community that has disappointed them, still praying the prayer with honest words, even when they are not hopeful words, still under the load, still facing the same direction, still not done. I want to know where you are feeling the weight right now. Leave it in the comments, not the polished version, the real one, because the text gives you full permission to be honest about how heavy it is. What it does not give you room to do is walk away. If this word landed somewhere real in you, share it with someone who is carrying a load right now. And if you want to go deeper, the next word in this series is elpis, the word your Bible translates as hope. And the Greek world understood hope in a way that is almost the opposite of how we use the word today. We say hope and mean a wish, something we want but aren't sure of. The Greek elpis is an expectation anchored to something solid, a confident orientation toward what is coming, even when you cannot see it yet. It is the reason the writer of Hebrews can say, "Run with hypomoné," because the runner knows where the finish line is. The load doesn't get lighter when you have elpis. You just start to see with more clarity what you are carrying it toward.